Now we get to Ayn Rand's solution. Now we get to the revolution in this book, how she solves the problem. Concepts are an interrelating, not a seeing. Concept is a mental integration. Concepts do not zoom in on one concrete. You do not stare at a man more closely and see his manness. You relate, you zoom out, you take a wider perspective. And not only on all the men, but on a non-man. You need a foil. You need something that belongs in the same wider category, but differs from the things you're conceptualizing. And here is the big payoff. Concepts are formed by seeing that the two things you've zoomed out on, and even the third thing, because you zoom out wider, the two things are close on a scale of measurement compared to the third thing, the foil. Ayn Rand defines similarity as the relation between two or more existents which possess the same characteristic but in different measure or degree. So there is the same characteristic but in different measure or degree. But going beyond that, they possess the same characteristic in closely proximate measure or degree compared to a foil. They won't appear as similar, they'll appear as different if there's no foil. So for instance, if I ask you, is Chicago near Los Angeles? You would probably say no. Or you might be smart enough to say compared to what? And I say compared to the distance of either to the planet Mars. Oh yeah, they're quite near. They're in the same place. They're on planet Earth. They're in the same continent, North America. Yeah, they're only, what, 100,000th of the way, of the distance from either of them to Mars. Yeah, they're quite close. Well, are Chicago and Mars near or far compared to the star Vega? Oh, they're quite close. I mean, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from Chicago to Mars compared to, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of light years, each light year being 6 trillion miles, a star like Vega would be away. But so you see that nearness is relative, right? And similarity is nearness, relative nearness of measurements. Now, nobody has ever said anything like that before. You wonder, well, actually, let me take that back a little bit. Alan Gotthelf found a passage in Aristotle where he says that, in his biological writing, where he says that birds differ in the more or the less. And Greg Salmieri has investigated this further. And there's some good evidence that Aristotle actually, in his working science, held something like this, that similarity is an issue of the more or the less in the context of a differentiation. So nobody knew this. It took Ayn Rand to write the theory of concepts to get Alan Gotthelf to notice this one phrase in the parts of animals, I believe is the work. So it had zero impact on the history of philosophy because it was not part of his writings on epistemology. It was part of his working methodology and statements he made in his biology, in his biological writing. So no one has said this as a theory of concept formation in general as their official theory, but God bless Aristotle, got the idea and ran with it in his science and in his comments on his science. So concepts work by establishing a range or category within a commensurable characteristic, such as we did with distance being a commensurable characteristic. Chicago has a certain distance from New York. New York has a certain distance from Mars. Mars has, well, all of them have a certain distance from the star Vega. Distance is the commensurable characteristic within which you can distinguish near and far in a relative way. Concepts integrate the range. See how I made the dots into a line, which is an idea I got from Greg Salmieri. Concepts do not just recognize these things are similar against that. It institutionalizes that. It integrates a range of measurements into a solid permanent entity called a concept. So that is indicated by the solid line that we now see A and B are in. And notice that A and B are now the same. They're the same in falling into that range or category. They differ in where inside the category they fall, but they're the same in that they fall somewhere, but anywhere inside that category. So Ayn Rand's definition of what a concept is makes this clear, I think. A concept is a mental integration, not an insight, but a mental integration of two or more units possessing the same distinguishing characteristic, such as distance apart, with their particular measurements omitted. Now, the important thing is to understand measurements omitted does not mean measurements ignored. It is not a subtractive process. As she says, the measurements are omitted in the sense of some but any. You have some position in that range, but any position in that range. And she says that measurements exist is an essential part of the process. So we don't ignore the measurements, we don't strip them off, we interrelate them. We say these two are close together as opposed to that one. These two fall in the same region. These two are examples of the blue region, for instance, if we're doing color. We have to use the measurements to place them. We don't ignore them. We integrate them. We range set them. We set them in a range. We classify them. We categorize them. And I think the best example I give in the book is a teacher grading exams. So let's assume that the teacher uses the regular scale. 90 to 100 is called an A. 80 to 89 is called B. 70 to 79 is C, etc. Okay, now here are two papers. One is in 83 and another's in 87. They both fall in the 80 to 89 range. They're both B papers. Not because you look at one paper, say Jane's paper, you look at it and you say, I see it has B-ness. No, you see that its measurement, 83, is greater than 80 and less than 90. So it falls into that B range. It falls into the range of measurements you've attached the word B to as just a categorization of what in reality is a continuous range of possible measurements. So Ayn Rand gives the killer example or analogy that's even better than that one. She says the concepts are the algebra of cognition. When you say A plus A equals 2A, and that applies to 2 plus 2 equals 2 times 2, 3 plus 3 equals 2 times 3, 5 million plus 5 million equals 2 times 5 million. The A can stand for any number. It stands for some number, but it ranges over any number. It's not that there's some A-hood or A-icality or A-ness in the individual numbers 2, 3, 5 million. It's that we use it as a variable to stand for some, but any specific number, specific quantity. And in the same way, the concept man stands for some, but any individual human being with his own individual shape, his own individual height, his own individual thoughts, his own individual context of knowledge, his own individual use of language, etc. There's nothing about any individual that's universal. The problem of universals is solved by recognizing that universals are man-made. But man-made on the basis of objective, almost mathematical facts, quantitative relationships that exist out in reality. So whereas the nominalists say that the universal is man-made, they say it's made arbitrarily. You can apply it to anything you want. There's no objective basis. There's no one thing in common running through the things that you classify together. Ayn Rand says that it's man-made and it's made right or it's made wrong. The right way to make it is by a fundamental axis of measurement that is a range within a wider scale of measurement. The distinguishing characteristic that all the things have in common, such as rationality or blueness, is a range of measurements within the wider attribute, which she calls the conceptual common denominator. So blue is a range within hue. Rationality is a range of specific measurements within type of consciousness. And anything else you take, the distinguishing characteristic is going to be a range or category within a wider conceptual common denominator, which we abbreviate CCD. Conceptual common denominator is what all things in the genus have in common. You know, the wider category, like man is an animal. All animals have some form of consciousness. Man has the conceptual form, which is way up at the most, I guess from your perspective, way up here at the high end of the number of things that can, its scope, its range, its ability to deal with units. It's way up there. An animal can only deal with a few at a time. Concepts enable us, as we'll see next time, to deal with an unlimited number of units in one frame of awareness. That is what I have for the first part of the theory of concepts. Next time, tomorrow, we'll discuss the integration aspect of consciousness and what Ayn Rand calls the crow epistemology and the cash value of all this theory of concepts. So I'll stop here and take questions.